This is a People's History of Kansas City. I'm Suzanne Hogan. Kansas City is preparing to host the FIFA Men's World Cup this summer. It's the largest sporting event in the world, and we are the smallest of all the cities selected to host in North America. So leading up to this giant tournament, we've been asking how exactly Kansas City became a soccer city. And we're tracing the sport's origins across the U.S. on this podcast. From the immigrants who first fought for field space and respect, back when most people didn't even know what soccer was.
Legitimacy is what we were fighting for.
It'll take off. Just give it time. It'll take off.
To when Kansas City landed a Major League Soccer team, and the scene started to pick up.
Maybe the country was at the point where they could finally appreciate and embrace soccer if it was done the right way and if it was built from the ground up.
But there's a whole other huge part of our story we haven't talked about yet. Women's soccer. The rise and dominance of the women's game here is central to Kansas City's claim as an international soccer destination and a World Cup host city. I mean, it's maybe the reason why the United States is taken seriously in soccer at all. For me, it's been thrilling to witness this evolution firsthand. I grew up playing soccer and feel thankful to say it never occurred to me that I couldn't be a part of the sport because I'm a girl. I learned a lot of valuable life lessons and had tons of fun while competing with friends as part of the Brookside Soccer League in Kansas City. And as the granddaughter of a Costa Rican immigrant who was soccer obsessed, I watched so many suspenseful matches on TV. I remember watching the U.S. women's national team make history in the 1990s and thinking that team was so cool.
What a day this was, and it continues from the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. The United States has won the Women's World Cup.
And just recently, in 2024, my city achieved the badass bragging right of becoming the first city in the world to build a dedicated professional stadium for our women's soccer team. And Kansas City fans, both new and old, are not taking that for granted.
To have the first stadium in the world be in Kansas City is like, I'm beaming with pride, like a proud mama.
It's incredible to be in a scenario where I get to see a sport that I grew up playing on a professional stage.
And seeing all the girls that I know are gonna look up to these girls that we're about to watch.
Yeah, everybody's pumped.
CPKC Stadium in Kansas City, Missouri exists as this triumphant global celebration of women's soccer. But achieving this milestone took real grit, rejecting sexist systems, overcoming prejudice, and daring to build something bold and totally new. On this episode, we'll pay homage to the nearly 200 years that women spent battling for space and making the beautiful game even better. Heidi Smith is a former history teacher and a former soccer player and coach.
I am the author of Play On, From Adversity to Advantage Through 140 Years of Women's Soccer.
She spent 9 years researching and interviewing different generations of players. And she discovered, perhaps not so surprisingly, even those deeply connected to the women's game knew very little, if anything, about its history.
I mean, that's kind of my response, too, that I had no idea about all of these things.
Women have likely been enjoying soccer for as long as it's been played at all, which, as we covered in an earlier episode, is a history that goes back centuries. There's documentation of women playing on a team in Scotland during the 1600s, much to the disapproval of the church. But by most accounts, organized women's soccer first started in England. That's where the sport officially was founded in 1863 by a group of male players. They set up this foot-oriented set of rules for association football, what would become more widely known as just football across the world, and soccer in the U.S. After those official rules were established, groups of women in England and Scotland started picking up the game. But Heidi says they were not exactly welcomed with open arms. Women at the time were still fighting for the right to vote and confined to pretty narrow roles in society. It was seen as improper, even dangerous, for women to play a man's game.
The women that were involved, none of them were using their real names because they were afraid for their own safety, and those fears actually proved to be pretty well founded.
One early player was a suffragette named Helen Matthews, though she may be better known by her pseudonym, Mrs. Graham. She was a good player, and she helped form the British Ladies Football Club, which grew to several dozen members. And their matches sometimes attracted large crowds, but at times with the wrong sort of attention.
It seemed like it might be good news that 5,000 people showed up, but it wasn't, because they were all men. And before the whistle even blew, they were rushing the field, just fleeing for their lives, basically, as these men are all rushing the field to prevent them from playing.
Women faced violence at matches. Plus, they were barraged by unfriendly press coverage, criticizing their character, abilities, and attire. This made it difficult for the British Ladies Football Club to continue.
So there were a few more attempts just during that decade, but really the game went underground.
It wasn't until World War I that public perception around women's roles started to shift. As men went off to war, many women stepped into traditionally male jobs like factory work. One of the most important and also dangerous of these war effort jobs was producing ammunition. The industry employed almost 1 million women.
And so what ended up happening is a lot of women's teams were forming at these munitions factories, and Dick Kerr's was one of those.
Dick Kerr and Company became a major ammunition manufacturer during the war, and they were one of the factories across the country that encouraged women's soccer as a way to boost morale, in line with the tradition of male factory teams that existed before. Women's soccer matches between factories were also used as a way to raise money for different charities. They'd practice and play after long 12-hour workdays and during breaks. And in this hard time, the Dick Kerr team in Preston, England, became especially important for both entertaining folks and getting funds, because the players were really good.
They became like the most legendary team of their era. They were like superstars in their time.
There was one game where they had 53,000 fans show up and another 14,000 waiting outside.
They were the first team ever to play at night and the first team ever to play internationally.
After the war ended, women's rights advanced to a degree, as the English government granted women of a certain age and status the right to vote. But attitudes around women playing football took a negative turn. Newspapers reported that women's bodies were too frail to play and called the activity foolish. One doctor claimed, without evidence, quote, "Kicking is too jerky a movement for women." It didn't help that England's Football Association, or the FA, was also eager to have the men get back to playing the game and bring in money from ticket sales. The FA was threatened by the women's large crowds.
And so they found a way to get rid of them by accusing them of financial improprieties, which basically meant that maybe some of the players might have been actually getting paid.
Heidi Smith points out that while, yes, the women's matches were set up solely to raise money for charity, at the same time, these were working-class women doing this in their spare time. Teams struggled to have enough money for basic equipment and travel. But regardless, in 1921, England's Football Association passed a resolution restricting women from playing. It lasted for 50 years. The FA said, quote, "The game of football is quite unsuitable for females and ought not to be encouraged."
They didn't outright ban the game. What they did was they banned the use of any men's fields.
Basically, FA fields, referees, and resources were completely off limits to women. Furious, a captain from a women's team in Plymouth told a newspaper that the FA was, quote, "behind the times," and that the ban was based purely on sexual prejudice. She vowed to keep playing.
So these women's teams that were playing in front of, like, even Dick Kerr's was bringing in huge crowds. All of a sudden, they're playing in a park or just whatever they can find.
Plenty more countries and football associations around the world clamped down on women playing football, like in Australia, Afghanistan, Brazil, France, Germany, Iran, the Netherlands, Nigeria, Paraguay, Spain, Scotland, Wales, and so many more. The reasoning, consequences, and timelines vary from place to place. For some, it was financial, others tied to religious and cultural beliefs. Sometimes it was based on concerns for women's reproductive health. But these restrictions forced women who wanted to play football to take risks and get creative.
You had people meeting on tennis courts and just kind of sending each other little messages like, we're going to meet up in secret over here and play.
The Dick Kerr women's team continued even after the FA ban. They just found other spots for matches, like parks and open fields. They even traveled overseas to places like the U.S. for a series of games, but against men's teams, because at the time, the U.S. didn't have any organized women's teams for them to play. The United States didn't officially ban women from the sport, but it also didn't encourage it. As you heard in the first episode of our mini-series, soccer was for many decades considered an immigrant's game. It didn't get the attention or resources as American-made sports like baseball or football. Outside of immigrant churches, social clubs, and work sites, few people knew of it. Which also means these early soccer years in the U.S. are not very well documented. And it's extra hard to figure out how involved women were. Thankfully, our awesome friends at the Kansas City Public Library helped me find some answers. The earliest documentation we could find of men's matches around Kansas City was a newspaper article in 1904. And for women, old yearbook photos from Paseo, Central, and Northeast High School showed that school teams started coming together in the 1930s and 40s. One entry said, "It's very popular with the girls, despite the sore shins." Another cool find was a photo from the Kansas City Star Archives in 1948, showing a large group of girls from Westport High School playing soccer during gym on the grass at Gillum Park. And from Haskell Indian Nation School in nearby Lawrence, Kansas, a black and white action shot from the 1950s of 7 girls attacking the ball in the middle of a scrimmage. We should also give credit to St. Matthew's Catholic Parish across the state in St. Louis and Father Craig, who organized one of the first women's leagues in the country. The Craig League formed in the early 1950s, and it had about 70 girls between the ages of 16 and 22 who played regular Sunday matches at Fairground Park, attracting large, curious crowds. It was in these places, schools and churches, where intramural soccer really picked up steam in America. And in the mid-1960s, one of the very first collegiate varsity women's teams started at Castleton State College in Vermont. But the international organizing body of football, FIFA, still had no interest in women's soccer. So instead, women decided to put on an event of their own without FIFA. In 1970, a private federation organized a multinational women's soccer tournament in Italy with 7 teams. They even got a sponsor, Italian vermouth company Martini and Rossi.
The only non-European team competing in that was Mexico, and Mexico was a real surprise.
The Mexican women's team did really well in the tournament, placing 3rd, and the organizers saw an opportunity. The FIFA men's tournament had just been held in Mexico that same year, so why not build off that momentum and host a Women's World Cup in Mexico the following year?
Well, the reaction was not great from FIFA or the Mexican Football Federation. They both said no, and you can't use any FIFA-sanctioned fields. But fortunately, 2 of the biggest stadiums in the country were actually outside of their jurisdiction, so they ended up using those.
To fill giant stadiums like Azteca in Mexico City, organizers had to pour a ton of money into publicity. They printed banners, put out ads, and organized press appearances across Mexico. The tournament took place in 1971. That same year, England lifted its ban on women's soccer. England joined the tournament along with Mexico, Argentina, Denmark, Italy, and France. But no USA. It would still be another 15 years before we'd even have a national women's team.
La Copa Mundial Femenina de 1970.
This sort of rogue Women's World Cup was a defining moment for sports history.
And the only reason a lot of people know about it now is that a production team that included like Serena Williams created this documentary, Copa 71. But other than that, it got completely buried, which is astonishing.
The documentary, which came out in 2023, is awesome. It features archival footage and interviews with players from all the different countries.
Going from England, where women were frowned upon for playing football, to go somewhere like that and see other countries even.
Coming out of the airport, and it was lined, just lined with people.
These women footballers had never experienced anything like this level of attention. For many, simply playing on this giant stage was life-changing.
Hoy es el día que todos esperamos, la final de la Copa Mundial Femenil, México contra Dinamarca.
In the end, the Mexican team earned a spot in the final, facing off against Denmark. But leading up to the match, a rumor circulated that the Mexican team wouldn't play unless they were paid 2 million pesos.
These were working class women, students, all of that. They were not getting paid throughout this entire process. And so they, to the extent that their coach at one point had to put out a plea for, we don't have cleats, we don't have soccer balls, we don't have basic things.
A lot of the women's teams had to do their own fundraising so players could even afford to participate. You might be noticing a trend here. Meanwhile, the tournament was attracting large crowds, and plenty of merchandise was being sold. After days of media attacks, the Mexican team agreed to play the final for their fans. Over 100,000 people packed into Azteca Stadium to watch. Mexico lost to Denmark 3-0, but the stadium still erupted into cheers for all the players. It was the most attended women's sporting event in history up to that point, putting on display all the untapped potential for women's soccer and all the hurdles still to overcome.
So this is this huge international success. It seems like it's the beginning of a new day for women's football, just internationally and in Mexico. And then the whole thing just completely goes away.
You might think after this unofficial tournament in 1971, FIFA would be like, hey, that was great. We should organize a real Women's World Cup. And that maybe all the female athletes went home to their countries and became like huge celebrities with sponsorship deals and packed stadiums. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. The Danish champions were greeted with some short-lived praise, but others faced public scrutiny and punishment from their national football associations for participating in this non-sanctioned tournament. The United States didn't play in Copa 71, but the next decade brought significant leaps forward for women's rights and women's sports. The very next year, in 1972, Congress passed the law known as Title IX.
For the first time in our history, the cherished American ideal of equality of educational opportunity would be affirmed in the law of the land by the elected representatives of the people in Congress.
Expanding benefits and opportunities for any American helps the rest of us. Wasted opportunity diminishes all of us.
Title IX basically says, for anyone that doesn't know, that any educational institution that's receiving federal funding needs to offer equal opportunities to men and women, boys and girls, and that included sports. And that was just like a sea change because women's sports had not had that level of support ever. And so suddenly it's the law that if you're offering this for boys, you need to be offering it for girls.
The women liberation movement created a situation where the girls is participating in the game.
I managed to raise my children, play soccer, and have a job by keeping busy all the time, having a family that understands what I enjoy doing.
That really coincided with just this explosion of youth soccer clubs in the early 70s.
Title IX legislation laid groundwork for advancing all women's sports in the country, but it significantly created a boom in women's soccer for a few reasons. One was the lower cost. Soccer didn't require the same level of equipment as some other sports. Plus, Heidi Smith says soccer was still newer here. It wasn't marked with the same stigma or patriarchal baggage that other sports carried.
It wasn't football, American football. It wasn't baseball, so it wasn't a traditionally male sport in this country, which I think is why girls were allowed to play it, especially young girls. Whereas if you look at England and Brazil and Germany and these places where you would think it would be obvious for girls to play, it was absolutely not okay.
And once there were more college soccer programs, even more high schools formed teams and middle schools.
You're Americans, aren't you?
Yes.
It's a new sport in this country, isn't it?
Sort of.
How come you all play soccer?
In school, we have to.
And do you think it's catching on, or you think it's already catching on? Why do you think it's so popular?
It's fun.
And it's not that hard. It's not that hard?
No. Anyone can do it.
So you think women can play as well as men?
Oh.
Yeah.
Because of that timing, you had this whole generation of girls, including me, growing up with this game all of a sudden.
But even with this talent pipeline getting built, there really wasn't anywhere for women's soccer players to go after college. Cities still didn't have real pro teams in the ways that they supported other sports like American football teams and baseball, basketball, hockey. And there certainly was no official U.S. women's national team. For many years, a team out of Dallas, Texas called the Sting served as our country's de facto representatives, and their solid performance at international tournaments helped the U.S. Soccer Federation see the potential. In 1985, our nation's first official women's national team formed. And internationally, pressure was building for FIFA to catch up and finally create a World Cup for women.
It all started as an experiment in China in 1988 after concerns at the FIFA Congress 2 years earlier that women's international football was being neglected.
This is from a documentary FIFA produced called Raising Their Game. FIFA first tried a sort of test, the Women's Football Invitation Tournament in China. They wanted to see if it could work, i.e. make money.
12 countries from 6 continents were invited to the Guangdong province in southern China. Some 45,000 turned up for the opening match between China and Canada, and attendances remained strong throughout.
The tournament turned out great. There was healthy competition between nations and high fan turnout. So FIFA announced they would hold their first ever Women's World Cup in 1991, also in China. Just 6 years after the U.S. formed its first national team, we came into the tournament with power.
It's Norway in red versus the United States to decide the women's world champions. The female game is every bit as committed as the men's, and what the women may lack in technical sophistication, they certainly make up for in their will to win. Expect a much more open and attacking game than a men's World Cup final.
The U.S. women did something that the U.S. men had never done and still to this day have yet to do. They became world champions.
So, a new winner for FIFA. No U.S. team has ever won a FIFA competition. But all that's changed now. Tears of joy and big hugs for this USA team.
That kicked off a decades-long run of U.S. domination in the global soccer scene. For women.
The 90s were so pivotal because that's the coming of age for this generation that were children in the 70s. And so now they're in their 20s.
And they were on a roll. After winning the World Cup in 1991, the U.S. women's team won gold in the Olympic Games in 1996, the very first year that women's soccer was offered as a competition. 3 years later, the FIFA Women's World Cup was hosted here in the U.S. at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California. I remember watching the final, the U.S. versus China. At the end of regulation time, the game was still tied at 0, leading to a nail-biting penalty kick shootout.
It also means that the USA could win the World Cup on this next kick.
I still get chills when I think about that moment. Brandi Chastain stepped up to kick the ball, and it sank into the corner of the goal. She immediately ripped off her shirt, revealing her black sports bra, and fell to her knees in pure bliss. Her teammates rushed the field. Everybody's jumping, hugging, screaming for joy. That goal earned us our second World Cup win. As a young kid watching, I had no idea exactly how much women's soccer had accomplished in such a short time. But I remember how I felt witnessing what we were capable of achieving when we were given the space, and feeling so damn excited about it all.
I think you could draw a direct line from Title IX to 1999.
The members of that U.S. women's national team came to be known affectionately as the 99ers, and there was an explosion of media around them, which was all part of raising the profile for the sport and women's place within it.
Bring it in, kids. Here we go. Here's your 1999.
Now, I'd like to present you with a cover of this week's Sports Illustrated magazine, which will have the greatest picture of a sports brawl in the history of publishing.
I'm completely overwhelmed by all of the support here today, all the support we've had throughout the Women's World Cup. I just want you all to know that you're very important to what this team means and what this team does, and we need you to be successful.
You talk about the 99ers, the most common expressions used to describe them were number 1, babe, and number 2, girl next door.
Heidi Smith says mainstream culture was still not always taking women athletes seriously, even when they were at the top of the world. It's a trend we still see today across sports.
Just much more likely to be put in a box, and if they do anything outside of what is considered societally acceptable for women, they're going to be punished. Whether it's Serena Williams getting angry about something, or Canadian women's hockey team smoking cigars and drinking beer on the ice after they won a gold medal. It's like, that's fine for men all the time. When they win championships, it's expected, but women, nope, can't do that.
Are you going to be on the Wheaties box or not?
We're working on it.
Working on it. Now, see, that's my point. Well, there should be no work. It's a done deal. It's a slam dunk. Excuse me, to use another sport. Are you guys making any dough out of this now? Can you, this is like an amateur tournament, isn't it, theoretically?
You know, like that Wheaties box?
Yeah.
We're working on it.
Mia Hamm and Brandi Chastain did end up making it onto that box. But they and the rest of the 99ers continued to face that dreaded double standard, in particular around the issue of pay, or lack thereof. Because while the winning team of the 1998 Men's World Cup went home with over $6 million, FIFA didn't offer any prize money at all for the women's tournament a year later. Back at home, the 99ers were also in a dispute with the U.S. Soccer Federation over pay. It took decades of women players advocating for better working conditions, decent facilities, and equal pay, finally culminating in the team filing a gender discrimination lawsuit against the U.S. Soccer Federation, in a 6-year court battle that was finally settled in 2023. Money was also an issue as players and advocates attempted to finally form a professional U.S. Women's League back in the 2000s. But they could never quite sell enough tickets or get enough corporate support to sustain teams. And after a few years, they'd fold. There was WUSA and Women's Professional Soccer. And meanwhile, the Men's National League, Major League Soccer, or the MLS, was also in its infancy and struggling. The MLS kicked off in 1996 after its own false starts and was also trying to gain a foothold in popular culture. So for the first few decades, the players on the U.S. women's national team were basically doing it as a side hustle. And yet, they were still kicking major ass. They won the Olympic gold medal again in 2004, 2008, and 2012, setting the record for the winningest team in the sport, men or women. Players like Hope Solo, Abby Wambach, Megan Rapinoe, and many others became household names.
Ladies, congratulations. The U.S. women's soccer team, 3 peats.
Please welcome co-captains of the team, Alex Morgan and Megan Rapinoe.
We're here with soccer great Abby Wambach, and you guys have sent in some great questions for her.
Kind of funny that the World Cup isn't a cup.
I know. I know. We were looking forward to drinking out of it, but that's not coming.
Yeah, you can. You give me a
Soccer superstar Hope Solo finished up on the soccer field and headed right into the dance studio, where they rehearsed for Dancing with the Stars.
Danielle Russell was one of those fans watching at home who became transformed by the hype around the U.S. women's national team.
It was just something with the personalities.
She saw bits of herself in them.
A lot of queer people really got into the team because it was women's sports were something that was safer for queer women, especially. And that's around the time Megan Rapinoe came out, who is one of the first openly gay athletes in the U.S.
What would you say to other athletes who may be nervous about coming out?
I would tell them to come out. And I would tell them it's okay and it's going to be okay.
And so I was like, well, I have to watch because I'm figuring out my identity. I was like, this is who I am. I got to watch.
In 2012, some big news dropped that changed Danielle's life. A new National Women's Soccer League, the NWSL, was forming. And Kansas City was going to land its first ever professional women's soccer team, FC Kansas City. They played for 5 seasons, and yet
I don't hear FCKC mentioned at all. Or if I do, it's very briefly, and they usually call it like KCFC or something wrong, which happened while the team was playing, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but yeah.
Right after the announcement dropped about FC Kansas City, a supporters group formed, which Danielle Russell joined. They called themselves the Blue Crew, after the team's nickname, the Blues.
And we were the first supporter group in the NWSL. We were smaller than some of the other ones, but we were the first.
Like we talked about last episode, fan experience is a huge part of the game, and teams need fans to be successful. That's where supporter groups come in.
It brings the atmosphere.
They bring the drums, the signs, organize the chants, put on elaborate costumes, wave the giant flags. They bring that contagious energy.
And players all around the world have said, like, that fan support will bring them from, I'm running for 90 minutes, I'm exhausted, to these people are cheering for me, let's kick the ball into the net.
It was easy for Danielle to cheer on FC Kansas City.
The team was dominant. They won the MVP. They won Goalkeeper of the Year. They won Coach of the Year. They went to the semifinals, and they played at a high school stadium.
Back when the Blue Crew started, they didn't sound quite like that. They were a very small but enthusiastic group cheering on these professional athletes who were playing on a field at Shawnee Mission North High School.
I know for the Blue Crew, there were games where there were 4 of us there. In our little, there are other people kind of sitting with us, but in the supporter section, there were 4 of us. So we did our best, but, it wasn't a lot.
The following year, FC Kansas City games moved to the campus of the University of Missouri, Kansas City, then eventually the fields at Swope Park. But attendance was still low.
So it was this great product, not played in front of a lot of people.
In their short run, FC Kansas City won 2 national championships. But after 5 seasons, low ticket sales and mismanagement of funds led to the announcement that in 2017, the team's assets, players, etc., would be transferred to a new team that would form in Utah.
The team was folding. Those championships are gone with it, and it was devastating.
But fans never stopped wanting a team of their own. Flash forward 3 years later, Danielle had started cheering for a different NWSL team in Chicago, until she started to hear some rumors.
Our now president, Kirsten Ross, was like, would you guys buy season tickets if a team came back? And we're like, Kirsten, stop. Move on. It's fine. You can move on. We have. And so it was a lot of that. And then it just didn't stop. And then, just other rumbles.
These rumbles included the names of some pretty big sports powerhouse people who would be financially backing this Kansas City revival. Entrepreneurs Angie and Chris Long, and Brittany Mahomes.
And I was like, okay, something might be happening here.
And in 2021, this ownership group announced Kansas City would be the home of a new professional soccer team.
So very early on, they made it known that we want the Blue Crew. We want you guys.
Danielle Russell, of course, immediately ditched her Chicago fan gear and was back. The new team's name? Kansas City Current. The colors? Teal and red. And the ownership group wanted to treat this new team like the professional athletes they were. Gone were the days of 4 fans cheering in the supporter group section or matches at high school stadiums. They declared that the Current would build their very own home, CPKC Stadium, a professional soccer facility right downtown along the Missouri River, to become a signature part of our city's skyline. Completed in 2024, the stadium was the very first of its kind in the world.
Welcome out here to CPKC Stadium. It is now officially open. Oh, what a time to be alive here in Kansas City.
And I can tell you from talking to players yesterday, they appreciate what this is. They don't want it to just be one. They want this to be the first of many to come.
You can see how special it is now.
Danielle Russell is vice president of the Blue Crew now. She says even the group's decision to keep their old name in spite of the new teal color is an homage to that earlier journey to honor KC's first team.
You can appreciate where we are. You can appreciate the investment. You can appreciate the growth. You can appreciate the fan support. Just watching the history of it. It makes me really emotional.
The NWSL has built something that soccer fans, even a decade or two earlier, could only dream of. The league has expanded to 16 teams and steadily grown in attendance and viewership across the whole league. In just a few years, Teal fever has taken over Kansas City. You can easily spot people wearing Current swag. Players' faces are plastered on billboards, buses, murals, and the new streetcar line. Home games at CPKC have consistently sold out, and the Current's training facility in Riverside will serve as one of the base camps for the Netherlands this summer during the Men's World Cup. Not to mention, Kansas City's name is in the mix as a potential host city again in 2031 for the FIFA Women's World Cup. Let's pretend like I don't know anything about the Current. Like, what's KC Current 101 if you want to be a fan?
The first thing you need to know is you have to wear teal. It is the identity. Second is, I would say, Lola Bonta, who is the captain of the Current. She is, at this point, the only player on the roster who actually played for FC Kansas City. So she's royalty around here, basically, now. She runs the city.
LaBonta also represents the U.S. on the women's national team and is the person who coined the team's famous chant,
KC baby on 3, 1, 2, 3. KC baby!
And 3, it's fun. I recommend coming out to a Current game if you can. Tickets are harder to find.
I would love that.
It's a safe place to get wild.
The fact that I still hadn't even been to a match was kind of embarrassing, especially because, get this, Danielle, who goes to like almost every game, actually doesn't even live in Kansas City. She's been traveling from Des Moines, Iowa all these years for these pro women's games. To make this right, last fall I took her advice and I finally made it to my very first KC Current game. And I gotta say, it does live up to all the hype. Sitting with the Blue Crew, there were fireworks after goals, the drumline never stopped. Danielle was right. The stadium vibe and fans does feel special, especially when you think about everything that's gone down so we could be here together at this space in this moment. It makes me so proud.
We're the first, we're the best. The energy is just like 100 all the time.
I think it's something we'll probably do until we can't walk anymore. We'll be coming out here.
I think in this time where we're divided about so much, this is one thing that actually brings people together. I'm all about, hey, go Current.
When they announce both teams, like, people are cheering for the other team. And I have never seen that at a male sports game.
To me, it's one of the most inclusive environments you can find in Kansas City. Like, super accepting, super LGBTQ plus friendly.
It's so fun to like identify in the community, like who's KC Current fans. And when you see someone else that's a KC Current fan, you're like, oh, like you're a legit Kansas City fan. Soccer, and especially women's soccer, I feel like is more niche. And so it's like, no, you're like Kansas City through and through.
This episode of A People's History of Kansas City was reported, produced, and mixed by me, Suzanne Hogan, with editing by Mackenzie Martin and Gabe Rosenberg. Special thanks this episode to our intern, Jacob Smolin, who interviewed fans and gathered archival audio. This is the third installment of a series we're doing leading up to the World Cup in collaboration with the Great Game Lab at Arizona State University and the Us at 250 initiative at New America. You can find more World Cup coverage at kcur.org/soccer. That's also where you can sign up for our special email to stay up to speed on all the latest news around the tournament. Again, that's kcur.org/soccer. A special thanks this episode to the Missouri Valley Room at the Kansas City Public Library and head librarian Michael Wells, Kansas City Current, and the Great Game Lab at Arizona State University, which explores how sport connects us to the rest of the world. You heard sounds from Univision Deportes, freesound.org, Kansas City Current, Fox Soccer, Copa 71, White House Television, Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, William J. Clinton Presidential Library, the National Archives, Soccer USA, Raising Their Game, FIFA, CBS Late Show with David Letterman, AP Archive, Polar Bear Suburbs, NBC's USA Today, Fox Soccer, ABC's Jimmy Kimmel Live, KMBC 9, KSHP 41, CBS Mornings, and Blue Dot Sessions. We are a production of KCUR Studios, a podcast network in Kansas City. If you liked this story, please share it with your friends and consider making a donation to the station that makes it all possible. Go to kcur.org, hit that donate button at really any amount. Seriously, it all helps out. We'll be back next month with another episode about the everyday heroes and underdogs who shaped Kansas and Missouri. I'm Suzanne Hogan. Take care, and thanks for listening.